How's singing for After Dusk, man?
It's fun. It takes a lot of energy though. Very tiring. But
So, so if you guys like heavy metalcore, hard rock music, be sure to go check out After Dusk over on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find music. Even YouTube, they got some really awesome music videos. I would highly recommend going to see. So how you doing, Matt?
I'm good, man. How about you?
Doing all right. So as I mentioned, you are a creative, a person that does music and stuff on everywhere in the world now, pretty much.
Try to create
thanks to the
things.
internet. Yeah. I find it interesting how. So it's kind of hard to, I guess. So let's put it this way: when it comes to music, music has like a really, really undeniable way of like influencing people,
Right.
and it's not like other art. Most other art is tangible, and so like you can touch it, you know.
Right.
But with like you can touch, feel, and see a lot of art, but like with music, you can't
Right.
physically touch it. You can't see it. It's like it's kind of its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does that mix in with a Christians and, you know, their call to the gospel? Like with the amount of influence that music can have on someone, is there like a special way that music and Christian artists can approach that?
I'm not sure. I think it's entirely up to what your goal is, because I think that especially in today's day and culture, like, you know, the conversation of the last decade has been a lot about whether you have a Christian band or a Christian that's in a band.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we get those crossed where we're thinking less about their intentions or what they're trying to do with the music and more about how they're branded,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a terrible way to approach things, because regardless of the content of the music, sometimes we put people in the wrong basket based off strictly where their records are sold or what radio station that they're played on, and not so much the hearts of the artists.
Yeah.
When it comes to being a Christian, I personally think that stuff is the least important thing, and we get too wrapped up in it. So I actually try to avoid those labels altogether. I don't try to, you know, wrap myself up in like this big, like, marketing scheme, I guess I would put it.
Yeah.
My goal is to be as transparent and real as possible. Sometimes I think the modern day Christian culture isn't ready for that. I think sometimes we're too used to hearing songs about what it's like after you've come out of the valley, and we don't want to hear any songs about when you're still in it. We want to hear about on the other side because he heals and all this, and they don't want to hear the songs of I'm currently angry with God and I'm currently going through these problems. I think both are incredibly useful, and both of them are necessary, but we're kind of afraid to ask those questions, or at least to the public. Whenever you're making music, you're kind of like taking an inner part of yourself and you're exposing that
Mm-hmm.
to the world, and people are all about a happy ending, but they're not about you exposing the ugly parts, even if you're on a journey to the good ending. But what they don't realize is that a lot of people are currently in that part of their life. Like, they may not be a creative and they may not be trying to express that to the world, but sometimes because you were honest about where you were, people go, oh man, that's exactly where I am. And
Yeah.
I didn't think you people went through that. I've just been looking at, not to name names or what, like I always name like Jeremy Camp, because I think Jeremy Camp's an incredible singer, and he seems like a really awesome, down to earth, nice guy. And he seems very perfect. There's nothing wrong with his branding or any of that stuff, but I think that people take it super seriously to where it's like they're not humans anymore. They're celebrities, and they're almost like idols. And I think that's a horrible place that we find ourselves in. I think it was unintended. But I don't know. So from my perspective, making art, I just want people to see something that's real, something they can relate to, beyond, you know, the stereotypical. I feel like every artist says that. Like, I just want to be relatable, man. But not like on the brown-eyed girl kind of relatable, you know, where like, what's the most broad thing I can say? I actually love writing songs where I'm like, ooh, this is so specific to the topic that there might only be like a few people that actually understand what I'm writing about.
Yeah.
But to them, it'll be so special. It'll be like, holy crap, this song is exactly what I'm dealing with. Instead of writing something broad that, you know, that cool, anxiety and depression, like we all deal with that to some level or another. And yeah, we have songs about that, but the ones that are really close to my heart are the ones where it's like there may not be very many people dealing with this, but to those that are, the song is going to be really special, and it might be the only one they have.
I have a couple things to go off of that. So, well, one, I think we find out, at least I've found out as I've gone through life, that the problems that I think only I'm facing, turns out there's actually a lot more people that are facing the same thing. It's just most of us are doing it silently.
Right.
But I want to go back to the whole, like the example you made with Jeremy Camp real quick. And we'll move on to the more... it's such an interesting thing when it comes to music and Christianity, I find, because one of the takes is that because it's Christian art, that it has to be, how do you put it, very 80s church-esque, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And not that being 80s church-esque type art is a bad thing, but so there's a couple takes. One, like it has to be super clean, very washed type of art.
Right.
And there's that take, which is probably like the Jeremy Camp take. And then there's other people that will say that you're labeling yourself as a Christian band just so that you can quickly enter a market.
Right.
That's usually underserved. So like there's the conflict between those two takes.
Right.
But I've spent early last week thinking about this question specifically because I wanted to talk with you about it. One of the things I came up with thinking is, so everything we do unto the glory of God. Whether I always use the example plumber, but even if you're a plumber or you're a CEO of a business, everything you're doing as if you're doing unto the glory of God, or even a Twitch streamer, you do it as if you're doing it unto the glory of God. And so I think for some reason, Christians like to hyper-focus that on musicians, especially. But like they won't focus it on, every little other occupation there is out there. And so like I agree to the point that like we're supposed to do artistic things. Right. We're always pointing towards the glory of God, pointing towards the gospel.
Right.
But why aren't we doing that in other occupations as well? Why are we hyper-focusing on music specifically?
Right.
Go ahead.
I think it's a lot to do with culture, and it's easy. We separate music into boxes anyway, and sometimes to our detriment. Like, I brought this up many times before that it's funny the genre that we're in because there's no other genre that you can split into like 50 subgenres, and it's literally so people can identify with each other. Like if you're into hardcore, metalcore, deathcore, you name it, there's a million of them.
You never heard of funk, pop, electro, country music?
See, yes, I think that's probably a thing, but there aren't very many people that just be like bringing that up. Like, bro, I'm into that. Exactly. Like, but in our scene, you'll have people almost argue about, what the best bands are, but they're not metalcore, they're hardcore or whatever. It's like it's all metal. It's all the alternative heavy music scene. But like, yeah, I don't know. I think that that's partially why we do that. And so we also did that with like in the 90s with Christians. Like we decided, okay, there's this music, and to be fair, it kind of devolved because I think at first Christian music was strictly, it's like, okay, I get this, why it's called that, because it was worship music. It was all about Jesus. It was these things. And then you start having these artists that are Christians, and maybe they made music that was strictly worship music or about Jesus or about just our faith in general, but they were more than that. They're artists that wanted to write songs about other things. And now, yeah, they might see it through a Christian lens, but that doesn't mean that the song is going to say Jesus' name in it every time, or that it's not going to come. Like, you might be able to listen to it as just anybody and not have a clue that person was coming from it from a Christian lens. And I think as it devolved and Christian music became more mainstream, you had a bunch of bands, especially like early 90s to the early 2000s, where none of their music would have been considered worship, or the only thing that was Christian about them was they were on a label that was considered a Christian label, and they were like sold in Christian bookstores because they were clean. You wouldn't hear curse words or like these crazy themes and explicit things in their music. But other than that, their lyrics were just They were just making art.
You may be able to correct me, but wouldn't a band like isn't Evanescence fall into the category that you're describing?
So Evanescence, at first, they were on a label called Wind Up, and Wind Up got a rap for putting out Christian music because they started off with Chevelle, and they had Creed, a bunch of, it was only a few, they had 12 Stones. 12 Stones was explicitly a Christian band. But they had a bunch of bands that were kind of in that gray area of, they're putting spiritual themes in their lyrics. And then I heard in an interview, one or two of the members said that they were a Christian. And so that became the thing, because early 2000s, you're either Christian or you're not. Those are two categories, right?
Yeah.
Then we'll talk about what kind of music you make. Evanescence, I'm pretty sure, like during their second record, cleaned that up. Where they're like, no, like some of us believe in that, but that we're not in that market.
Yeah.
Which that's all it is, if you ask me, is a market. But yeah, Evanescence would have fallen in that category, just not officially, like to the point where it's like that on paper. So they're being sold in the Christian bookstores, you know. But yeah, and I think that's just like a weird conversation of like, why are we wasting time like putting human beings into a box?
Yeah.
It's not just art. It's literally the people and the hearts that they're pouring into the music. And sometimes I think we get super distracted by how things are marketized and not really like for instance, I had an ex-girlfriend in high school, and she was incredibly upset with me because I listened to 3 Days Grace, and because they weren't a Christian band, and she was kind of a new Christian. It was like, you know, maybe like a year and a half or something like that. And I was like, but I can listen to Skillet. And she was like, yeah, they're a Christian band. I was like, so what's the difference between a love song about a girl, 3 Days Grace, and one from Skillet? Because both bands have those. And she was like, well, one's a Christian band. I'm like, what does that mean? Yeah. It doesn't mean anything. It's literally how they're marketed. And whether or not, I don't know what the guys in 3 Days Grace think about faith, but when neither band is speaking about that, why are you introducing morals into whether or not you should listen to one's art and the others? I get it if one of them is like just spouting like things that are countercultural to your values, then yeah, maybe you'd be like, okay, I don't really want to listen to this individual who's saying things that I just disagree with to the core. Yeah. But you know, when it's just everyday life things, I think it's just a big distraction personally.
I think, and we'll move on in a second, but I want to finish with this. So I find Skillet an interesting case study when we're talking about this.
Yeah.
So I've gone to a few Skillet shows, and I've followed them throughout the years on social media and things, and they do a lot of, I guess the right word would be evangelizing in their shows and stuff. Yeah. And that seems to me like what would separate a Christian band, air quotes, with an actual Christian band.
Right.
So another person that comes to mind is someone like Lacey Sturm when she was on Flyleaf.
Love Lacey.
She would do a lot of the same stuff, a lot of evangelizing while, you know, screaming super hardcore music. And so, and if you take that application into literally any other thing, you know, they put on the show, they put out great music. Then they also bring in the the evangelizing aspect of it.
Right.
I feel like that's the correct approach when you're trying to navigate this exact conversation. And I'm not big into music anymore like I used to be. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily know who falls into this category anymore that, you know, isn't an older band. Are there really modern Christian bands that are popular in this space, like the metal and metalcore scene?
I think a lot of them are. There's a lot of people that have kind of ascended to this like legendary status, like where they're veterans now, and they came up during the time where that was the thing happening. And I think a lot of them were kids, and like the labels were. I won't even say that the labels had ill intent, but it was a lot to do with how things were being marketed. Where the kids in the band were taking it very seriously from like you said, an evangelical kind of standpoint. But not all of the bands associated with that were doing the same thing. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I've yet to see Norma Jean live, but I watch a lot of live videos. Love that band. I don't think Norma Jean ever took their quote-unquote Christian band status the same way Under Oath did. Now, Under Oath is not a Christian band anymore because not all of the members consider themselves that way. They use like certain words, like explicit language in their music now. They feel that's more authentic to who they are. And but I don't think Norma Jean ever did that, like on stage, like try to evangelize to people or whatever. Yet they were both on the same label, and they were both considered to be the same exact like Christian band. They were considered to be just that same exact group. Nothing separated them. There was a lot of bands like that where like they'd be like, we just make music and we do love Jesus, but we're not preaching to people. We don't feel like we've been called to preach to people. And they got thrown in the same basket as those who did, like For Today, which For Today, that's like the example. Like that man preached on stage when that man was still around. But yeah, I think it's more us just compartmentalizing things in our brain, unless, again, like we're having a conversation just focusing on the labels right now, which I think needs to be done because we did it mindlessly for decades. Yeah. And now we can actually get past that and be like, oh, wait, there actually may have been some artists that were saying some really important, like deep, like heart-touching things that didn't have that label, but we wouldn't listen to them because of our weird exclusivity to Christian culture. And that's just, I don't know. I think it's weird to me.
Would you say there's some common themes that come with Christian music today? That like messages that are coming from their art today?
Definitely in like the mainstream Christian music, like pop music. Like a lot of it is, in my opinion, some people would disagree. I think that a lot of the mainstream pop music is very slow to adapt and try to be experimental. Mm-hmm. And you get a lot of the same songs written over and over again before like 5 to 7 years passes, and then you start to see, oh, there's this new trend that everyone is doing. It's on every song.
Are you talking like Carrie Job type stuff?
Yeah, like, which I love her, by the way. She actually came and played at my church like before she was anybody. Yeah. And now she's freaking massive. But yeah, like, I mean, you can obviously tell the difference between like Stephen Curtis Chapman in the 90s to like modern day Hillsong stuff getting played on the radio, but it takes a long time for that to change.
Like, what about in the metal scene?
In the metal scene is never really, I'm not saying it doesn't follow trends, but it doesn't follow Christian trends. Okay. Like the mainstream pop, there's certain things that Christian music does and trends that it sets that they follow, whereas the metal scene didn't matter what the label was. It was following the metal scene as like overall, not the Christian metal scene. It was the two weren't separated outside of how they were marketed.
So there's really no common theme, like messages that you see coming out?
I mean, common themes, not that I would say amongst bands that are considered Christian, but just in general, like common themes in metal and heavy music tend to be like heartache and depression and hardships that you deal with and relationships, mostly just the darker stuff. I mean, it reflects the music itself, but I mean, it would be kind of weird if we were all, singing songs about rainbows and happiness to in a death growl. You know what I mean? But
I'd like to see it happen.
But yeah, I mean, I'd say the common theme is almost every artist that I listen to speaks from personal experiences, not a cultural accepted narrative, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's whatever they've dealt with. Now, a lot of them have dealt with the same stuff, so maybe they'll write a song about the same thing because they both went through that. Yeah. But in general, yeah, like that's why I think you end up getting like masterpieces. Like there's a song by Too Close to Touch called Eiley, and that's about the singer, which R.I.P. He just passed away like a couple weeks ago. But the singer's little sister, he had, if I'm not mistaken, 3 adopted little sisters from Asia, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and one of them passed away at a very young age. That's a pretty unique situation, and he wrote one of the most popular songs about that, and it is just gut-wrenching. But I don't think that you're going to have as many gut-wrenching songs coming out of the mainstream Christian pop scene, because a lot of them are real focused on what's happening, like what are people listening to, what should I do. There's a few, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them end up coming out to be the same kind of thing, and you don't get as many of those unique topics because not everyone is just trying to be like, okay, everything goes, and I will write from the deepest, darkest parts of me that I can. And because not everything goes on Christian radio, it just doesn't.
Yeah. Bring up a couple things, and I know we have. I think this applies to the ambiguity of life. It seems like there, like with a capitalist system that we live in, mm-hmm. There's you find a need and you fill it.
Right.
And that's how you make money.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it feels like the Christians want to be a part of this too, because they're a pretty large percentage of the population.
Right.
And so you try to fill that need real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of led us to kind of the situation that you were mentioning, like you said, like Chevelle and Creed. Like, I know those names, but I had no idea they had Christian air quote roots.
Right. Both of them were very early on, and I think that those were more projected onto them than less of them claiming that. Because, like, I think it was Chevelle's second record, and they dropped an F-bomb, and people were furious, and they're like, we never said we were a Christian band. They're like, but you're on this label. And we're like, yeah, so? And they were like, yeah, we're Christians, or at least I know one of them was. But, yeah, it was just one of those things where everyone had one or the other kind of thrust upon them at the time.
Do you think that Christian artists should have a more, not unifying, but more of a unified message, if that makes sense? Like, we're all kind of saying the same thing, but differently in our own way?
Not really. I personally think it's good. It's better to have the pure freedom to say what you think, even if it's not popular, because sometimes that doesn't always mean you're wrong.
Well, I mean, you can still say the same thing. Like, you can still say the same thing that's not popular or whatever. That's not, like, infringing on your ability to say what you want to say.
Right.
But it's more like our source material all comes from the same place.
Oh, yeah. If you're writing music that is explicitly sourced from, like, the Bible or your value system, wherever that might come from, I feel like.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, like you mentioned, music comes from your personal experience,
right.
and you're applying, and you're writing music that's influential to the soul is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
That speaks to similar moments in other people's lives, right? And so if it's Christian based, like trying to actually be a Christian artist,
right,
God's got to be a part of that, right, to at least some degree. And so if we're having a unified message in all of our individual experiences,
right,
shouldn't we have a more unified message, if that makes sense? It can still be individual in, like, the songs,
right,
and, like, the situations that people are,
right,
or situations or instances that we are creating art on.
Yeah.
But it can still be unified in the sense that it's all pointing towards the glory of God, if that makes sense.
Right. I think that there's
no. Let me clarify, because I think it can be a little confusing. So, like, you mentioned a lot of themes and songs are about, like, heartbreak and things in the metal scene, at least. And so you can say that there's multiple ways to approach a heartbreak.
Right.
You could be extremely angry about it and take revenge on the other person. You can be extremely angry and still come back with love. Right. There's infinite possibilities. And the Bible tells us what to do against those who transgress against us.
Right.
And so, like, when you're writing a song about how you feel in that moment and how that situation approaches you, you're communicating to an audience, this is the best way to approach this situation.
Right.
And so, like, is the roots of how this artist is approaching that situation, is it godly or is it not? Does that make sense? You can still be extremely individual, and it can still be, I'm not trying to, like, say we all should be the exact same Christian band, because it's art. Right. It's going to be individual.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of those weird things where only the individual knows if that is the case. Because I think there's sometimes, because cultures will form around a group of people that have a lot of things in common. A lot of times it's value systems and just, like, for instance, like, we're part of, like, a culture right now, just the alternative metal culture. That's like a culture all its own. Same thing with Christianity. And I think sometimes there becomes these little, like, invisible walls that they're there, but you're not supposed to acknowledge that they're there, and you're definitely not supposed to climb over the wall. So sometimes...
Are you referring to, like, an American Christian culture thing?
Yes, okay. Mostly American Christian culture. Nowhere else in the world, mostly here. But I think sometimes there are people that are 100% coming from that like you said, like they're doing what they're doing all for the glory of God. They're doing it from a perspective of like wholeheartedness. They're not being fake. They're being legitimate,
Genuine.
and they're being genuine. That's the word. They're being genuine, but sometimes I think they come across a little bit more like Martin Luther nailing the 99 Thesis, where at the time, many people might have been thinking that, but it doesn't mean that everyone would, one, acknowledge that they were thinking that, and then two, there was a lot of people that were definitely unhappy with that. And I think that, like, shoot, I can't remember his name. The guy that wrote How He Loves, it's not all the people that did their versions, like Crowder and everybody. Like,
yeah.
Mark McMillan, I think, might have been his name, actually. So he wrote one of the biggest, most overplayed, most just famous songs in all, like, the modern Christian culture.
It was the oceans of what, the early 2010s?
Right, exactly. Like every single church is playing it. It's being played on the radio. It's covered by the Newsboys. It's covered by Crowder. It's like everybody. And so he wrote that song, and then he went through a little bit of a crisis of faith some years later, and he was very open and honest about it. He would talk about it on podcasts. He wrote music about it. That basically a lot of the church and a lot of the modern Christian culture were like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. And the guy was never coming at it. I listened to many times when he talked about it. He was never coming at it from a point of, I'm no longer a Christian, or, you know, he was genuine about what he was speaking about, but he did not get received from the Christian side of things. Like I hate to say
he had a bravery to ask the questions that everyone's asking quietly.
Yeah, exactly. And he was not received with any kind of love or openness or understanding or even respect, for that matter, for it. If anything, he was kind of shunned away from it. And in some ways, because he was kind of he was an artist himself, but almost acted like a ghostwriter because of his most famous works being mostly famous by other people performing it.
Yeah.
But there's no way that the performers that, like, the normal person knew about could have come out and started asking those questions and been met with, I'm sorry you feel that way. You know, I'm here for you if you need prayer, or maybe even just, oh, well, I respect what you think. Let's try to work together and find a middle ground. Like, maybe let's look in the scriptures and see, like, what they say about this. It was mostly met with, oh, you're other. You're the other. You're not part of this. And it's like, what is this if not a group of people who share a similar value system that should be acting more like family and help to one another, and less of a tribal kind of, you know, reacting off these tribal instincts that, I don't know, can, in my opinion, sometimes be summed up to where you shop, what bumper stickers you got on the back of your car, what kind of music do you listen to, you know what I mean? Like mega church kind of mentality. And I don't think that's necessarily healthy on a lot of levels.
Do you think it's maybe because there's, I don't want to say wrong interpretations, but like it kind of seems like wrong interpretations of how, like, the average American Christian interprets how to, and like you said you said Matt McMillan, what was his name?
I think it was Mark McMillan.
Mark McMillan. He wasn't given, I don't want to say he wasn't given, he wasn't approached the correct way, if that makes sense. So like these kind of conversations aren't approached the right way. Do you think that's due to a lack of understanding by the mass of Christians, or you think it's just due to poor interpretation of how to interact in the world from the Bible, or do you think it's just like actually no reading of the Bible?
I think it's a little bit of all of that, and then I think it's a little bit of, like we mentioned, he was kind of poking the bear and asking the questions that most people, one, they're not used to hearing anybody of any kind of influence asking, because everyone wants to play it safe and make their brand squeaky clean and not appear to be a normal human being, because with that comes controversy, and with that comes it could hurt your brand. Like I said, he wasn't afraid to do that and ask some of those questions.
Is it like that the brands are trying to build like this stronghold that the Christians can hold on to for the hard parts of life?
Right.
Like, this person's not, we'll just say Jeremy Camp, even though I know Jeremy Camp's probably not trying to do this.
Right, just random name.
But like if Jeremy Camp can get through life not dealing with these questions that I'm dealing with, like, why is God allowing me to go through X, Y, Z, and so on and so forth. If Jeremy Camp is not addressing that, and I'm again saying that name for
Right. Just in general.
Yeah.
General representation.
General Christian popular person, then I can just ignore that.
Yeah. I don't think we consciously think it out even that far. I think that if certain things are never brought to light, then you will naturally ignore them anyway, and you may not even acknowledge them as a problem until someone does. And that's uncomfortable. And no one wants to do that, which is why a lot of people get shunned when they start to. I know a lot of Christians that, they were raised that way from the time they were born. And if you ask them, hey, do you think you'd still be a Christian if you were born in the Middle East? They can't answer that question. Yeah. The reason is they know the answer to that, and it's a hard answer. It's like, probably not, like at all. I would probably,
that's how they approach their Christianity to begin with.
Right. And you can't always, I think sometimes it's always incredibly difficult to look back and say, like, this is what I believe. Why do I believe that? And are my reasons why substantiated? And you know what I mean? Not just to others around me. Forget that. Just to me, And that's a hard journey to go on. And a lot of people that I don't think almost anybody fully finishes that journey here on this earth. But the people that have at least started on that journey, I think, have an understanding of what's going on a little more than those who haven't, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I think like a lot of this happened by accident, not like intentionally. Like I said, I don't think people like marketized Christianity out of like this evil scheme to make money. I think it just kind of started happening that way. And then we kind of people take art very seriously, and art, like we said, affects you like right down to your heart. But sometimes the artists aren't being quite as genuine, and the people getting you the music definitely aren't being as genuine. So you
generally,
so you find this giant pot of artists and new singles and music that just like doesn't have the heart in it, or it's playing it super safe, so safe that no one is even being touched or growing from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's sustainable.
Exactly. So,
now the questions, I don't know if you know the exact questions that Mark was mentioning or whatever, but I know that you wanted to talk about, I'm guessing, because these questions that you sent to me originally kind of felt like they were in that realm of probably what everyone's asking, but not necessarily talking about. And I want to clarify, I don't necessarily that I have the answers for like these questions, but I think they need to be talked about still.
Exactly.
And so the first thing that you brought up was like different people interpreting the Bible. Different people interpret the Bible differently. What are some ways we can ensure that interpreting it correctly, or at least getting as close as possible to interpreting it correctly? And I think if that's the statement, because I would agree that this mindset of the Bible, this view on the Bible is common.
Right. People
see the Bible and they think, well, it's been passed down for 2,000 years or so, translated who knows how many times, been through however many different writers and so on and so forth.
Right.
How can anyone actually like interpret this? And plus each person, there's an infinite amount of interpretations on something. And so, because like I had these exact same questions a few years ago, because like I got serious, I wanted to know like why am I doing this?
Right.
And so one thing I found out about the Bible is that it cross-references itself. What was the number? I have 340,000 times.
Right.
Which means like this section of the Bible that was written at a different time
by a different
person talks about this part of the Bible at completely different times, and they aren't contradicting one another.
Right.
And so that happening 340,000 times in the Bible is one very hard to do over a long period of time.
Right.
And then if you have thoughts on any, like this question specifically, you can go ahead and hop in as well. But another thing is like context in the Bible is extremely important.
It's everything.
So like, of course, if you take something out of context, you can make it mean 100 different things. And so like if we're concerned about the Bible being interpreted infinite number of ways, that it means nothing.
Right. We
need to make sure that the context is, being taken into consideration. Because like when Jesus, like the example I've heard many times is when Jesus says that he is the door. He is not. He's not saying that he's a literal 3-frame door.
Dang it!
Exactly.
That'd be
So
cool,
like, in the context of what Jesus is saying, is like, he's the passageway to the Father.
Right.
Are you seeing these kind of like I'm not the only one having these questions, right?
Right. No, not at all.
How are you seeing this come to fruition in your life?
I mean, to me, like I can't tell you when. It was at least 5 years ago, something like that. Like, I think everybody that is going to maintain their faith for any amount of time into adulthood eventually comes to that place where they have to go, like you said, like why am I doing this? And it kind of hit me. I was like, wow, I've literally been being taught this since I was so young. I can't remember that far back. So since it's always there, you don't really need to question those kind of things, especially as a child. But then I became an adult and realized, you ever have like those things where it's like, you knew that, but until it was pointed out, it never came to the forefront of your brain. And then you're like, oh wait, I knew that, but now I'm thinking about it in a totally different way.
Yeah.
Like, it just hit me one day where I was like, wait a minute, the Bible didn't descend from heaven in its current form. I think a lot of us think that's it. Like, God gave us the Bible.
Literally handed it to us.
Yeah, it's like, where's the part in the Bible where the Bible falls from the sky and then someone gently catches it and then, hands it out to everyone in the world? And I was like, well, where did it come from then? Like, because if you ask a child right now who wrote the Bible, what do you think they're going to say?
They're going to say God.
They're going to say Jesus. Jesus wrote the Bible. He didn't write a single book in the Bible, which is kind of incredible in some ways, but in others it makes a whole lot of sense, since a lot of it is like commentary on his life. And it's not really an autobiography, especially like the New Testament. But
well, I mean, if he wrote it himself, it would just become another Mormonism.
Right. It would be another, like, take his word for it, instead of a whole bunch of people writing about it, and you're going, wow, you all have the same story from different angles. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But that was when I started questioning, like, okay, cool. Well, then who did write the Bible? And then my teenage or early adult brain, when I found out, well, there's a whole bunch of them. And then you go, well, then you find out there's context where it's like, wait, this book wasn't, what do you mean that not every book in the Bible was written intentionally for me in 2022 to read it literally for the way that it is as instruction on my life? Because a lot of them, like in the New Testament, they're letters from one person to a group of people, which means that a lot of them, when writing this, they weren't thinking, a lot's writing on this, billions of people will read this and I got to get it right. It's, I have something to say to this group of people now. And we're just spectators on that. We're like getting to read what they said to them and for what reason. But then you think, well, now I need to know, what was their culture like? What year is this written and under what context? What was happening around them whenever this was written?
Yeah.
Only then can you see the context of, well, here's how I can apply that to my life. Here's where this information gets to be useful. That's why a lot of people read like Leviticus, if I'm not mistaken. It's just full of laws and rules and rules.
Yeah, it's one of the law books.
And they're just like, oh, see, this is why the Bible contradicts itself, because it says this here and it says that there. And it's like, you don't know why that book was written or by who or for what purpose, do you?
Yeah.
So that is a major part of understanding all of this. And I think that, I mean, that's just like we were talking about with music. There's a lot of questions that we don't address. We don't think about the toxic or the issues that the culture may have because it's easy to not to, and things have just always been the way that they always have been.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the Bible, where it's like, you've just known the Bible is good your whole life. So I'll read the Bible and get the good out, and I'll ignore the parts I don't understand because I'm scared that if I look into it, I still won't understand. And then I won't be able to justify anything I've ever believed. Mm-hmm. I think that's incorrect. And I think that you can definitely dig deeper and you will find answers for those things. Because I certainly feel that I did. But it's terrifying to think, oh God, what if I dig a little deeper and I find out all of this is not real? And my parents never dug that much deeper. I know that for sure. Mm-hmm. Not to the degree that I want to at the moment. And so it's really scary, and it's really easy to just say, well, I'll just keep doing what I've been doing because that feels right.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, one thing, so when Paul was writing these letters to these early churches, Paul was also going around and evangelizing and starting churches and planting churches around. And he was being persecuted as well. And so, I wanted to add this to the perspective because you were mentioning, he's talking about to these people in their situation.
Right.
also Paul's situation, because he writes these things like you need to do this, 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 while that's happening to him as well, like, or under extreme persecution or whatever. So like there's a whole lot you can get out of the letters that Paul writes.
Right.
And then of course, and I also wanted to say, like, I think your presumption of like starting that the Bible is good is probably a good presumption.
Yeah.
But like you said, once you start getting more into it and understanding it more, it's not necessarily good to just brush off like what you don't understand.
Right. So like I agree that it's a good presumption that the Bible is good, but if you don't know why the Bible is good, that's a very scary thing to try to delve into. It's like, okay, I'm about to finally dive into this thing that I've believed to be right or righteous for my whole life.
Yeah.
Now I'm an adult where I can rationalize things better. I'm terrified that I will be able to rationalize out of what I think already. And I think it's something that Christians are especially stubborn to do.
To be fair, I think most Christians, air quote Christians, don't actually read the Bible as much. Because I know for certain, even in my own life, I don't read the Bible enough.
Right, I agree. I'm the same exact way. But I think we're scared of it too. It's a big part of it. But like just pointing out like cultural things, like it's so funny to me if you look over just a couple of decades. I mean, we can look over the past 100 years, but like
we've lived in the past couple decades.
Yeah, just the past couple decades, we've moved exponentially further. But imagine something 30 years ago that if you walked into a church, for instance, it could be the way you're dressed, it could be having a tattoo, it could be anything, or just having had a divorce, Yeah. Imagine how the church would react to you versus today. Now, some of those things I think are infinitely good that we've moved away from those things, and some of those things maybe not so much, but like I wouldn't say any of the things I listed, but other things. It's just funny how quickly we move from hard no, and we say that's based on the Bible. Our hard no is based in the very source of our text, and then we would say that the reason we no longer hard no is also based in the Bible.
Based on the text in the Bible.
Based on the text. And it's kind of crazy. It's like, it's more, I'm sorry, but that was more based on your current feelings and your current distaste for it. Like, I don't want to be persecuted because I have this thought, and that is not the cultural norm of the church.
Yeah.
Like, I think there are some things that are completely indisputable where it's like, for instance, this is a really fringe thing that not a lot of people are doing, but I have seen churches do this where they try to rationalize everything. And they say, well, maybe Jesus didn't actually die and raise 3 days later. Maybe that's just like some metaphorical stuff that you can learn a lesson from.
Are you referring to like progressive Christian type
100%.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
But I think stuff like that where it's like, okay, if you don't believe in the death and resurrection, or maybe like the virgin birth, it's like, what do you believe then?
Yeah.
Like, because there's a lot of people that would, like, for instance, I'd say this. I've had someone ask me before, like, what if you're wrong about all this? And I would say, well, one thing I really, really don't think that I'm wrong about is that I think that Jesus knew how to live better than any other human on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
He told us what was right and what was wrong, and he didn't leave it there. He specified. Like when he would say, not only is it wrong to cheat on your wife, it's wrong to lust upon someone else. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do anything, just the lustful thoughts. Like that's not right.
If you look at a woman with lustful thoughts, you have already committed adultery.
You've already committed adultery, right? He went into specifics, and he told us.
You know how revolutionary that is for 2,000 years ago?
Insane.
Yeah.
And it was because he was doing exactly what Mark McMillan was doing. Not to compare Mark McMillan to Jesus.
Yeah.
But he was saying the stuff that culturally was difficult to handle back then. Yeah. And the number one people that were pissed about it were the
Pharisees.
The Pharisees.
Yeah.
It was like the top dogs, the most respected of the church,
Yeah.
And
the Jewish church, just in case anyone's curious.
Right, the Jewish church. Of
yeah.
course. There's been lots of changes since then, for sure.
And so I would agree that, of course, because even Paul says it, that if we don't agree that Jesus died and was resurrected, then we're fools for believing any of this.
Right.
So, like, from an artist perspective, like if you're going to be influential to other people with your music, if the core of what you believe, because the core of what you like, your life and situation, that everything you do is what creates your art.
Right.
Is that a fair thing to say? Like that the core of like your life is what the perspective your art comes from. Is that fair?
I don't think I can escape that. Like, even if I wanted to, like everybody, like, I might not be writing a song specifically about that, but I don't think that I can escape my point of view or my world.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, like my list of values is always going to be a part of that, and there will be like preconceptions that I'm going to go into with writing songs for sure.
And so, like, if that is the core of a Christian, because probably the thing that every Christian needs to believe, no matter what, we can have arguments about secondary issues in the Bible. But if the core thing is that Jesus died and was resurrected 3 days later, because that's basically the foundation, that's the gospel right there.
Right.
If that's at the core of an artist, and I'm just using artist because, you're an artist and that's the occupation that we've started this conversation in. Right. This can be applied to, as I always say, a plumber or a CEO.
Right.
When you create the art, that's going to still influence the art that you make, even if it's subtle. You know what I mean?
Because that's definitely not my whole intention. Like, as you've heard earlier, I have a wee bit of contempt for the idea of a marketized Christian band. I believe it was DC Talk. I don't remember which member, but I believe it was one of those guys that was asked about that, and they were like, DC Talk didn't go to heaven when it died. Like, what do you mean a Christian band? Like, so we're definitely not that, and we're also, the four of us aren't all on the same page as far as like what we believe, which I think is fine. Like, everyone's on a different journey, and I think that any band that claims that they are is either naive or they're lying to you, because not everybody is going to be in that exact same spot on their walk. Most people aren't like that with their marriages as much as we try to be, but we're not going to be in the same places, and we may disagree on things like that are pretty important about our spiritual life. But
would you say a band like, let's just say Skillet, just because we mentioned them before,
right?
Would you say that a band like Skillet, that their four members are all on the same page?
They might be very, very close, but I guarantee you there's something amongst the four of them where,
of course, they're going to have individual differences, but I meant like at their core in terms of the message that they're trying to get out.
Oh yeah,
their mission that they're doing.
For that, they'll definitely be. I think those guys are probably, guys and gals are probably definitely on the same page, that like what they're doing is all four of them are with it. There's not one guy being like, I don't even like Jesus that much. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But like on more deeper personal micro levels, but like, yeah, for my band, I don't think that we can. I can escape that from where I write lyrics, but it's also not entirely it's definitely not my goal to float the status quo, if that makes sense. Like, we have a lot of music coming out this year. We just released our second EP. We have 4 total, and we haven't really even gotten into the really deep spiritual stuff yet. The next 2 EPs are going to have a little bit of that.
Yeah. And
I think I personally dive into some territory that is definitely going to be considered as not marketable for one, under that Christian thing, which not that we're trying to anyway.
Yeah.
But for instance, one of the lyrics, there's a song that we have, I believe it's going to be on the 4th EP. It's called oh shoot, got so many songs in my head, I'm forgetting. Yeah, Fleeting Faith, that's what it's called. Thanks, Jamie. But yeah, Fleeting Faith. And the song is literally being in the deepest, most darkest spot of, do I believe this anymore? Mm-hmm. And if this house is burning down right now, is there anything I can even salvage, like moving forth with my life? And
are those lyrics right there?
Hmm?
Are those lyrics
right
there?
They're not. They're not. That's just a good metaphor.
I was trying to get a little sneak peek of what's coming out, but it's all right.
I can give you a little bit. There's actually there's one of the lyrics says, like, am I just talking to myself? Like,
yeah.
Am I real when I pray? Am I being heard? And what's my confirmation of that? Like,
yeah.
and there are some heavy questions, and like the lead lyric of the chorus is, "Where is God?" Like, he knew my face, but now I don't think he'd recognize me. And that stems from, just like I said, like I think almost everyone goes through that at some point, and if you don't, you might not be.
You're not human at that point.
Well,
it's probably fair.
Not only that, but I think
I don't think that actually happens.
I think there are some people that might not ever get to that point, but I think it's partially because they're avoiding the question. You know,
which means they still have the question if they're avoiding it.
Exactly. They just might not ponder over it that much. That being said, obviously, I'm not in that spot anymore, but a lot of people are afraid to write the song from the perspective of being in that spot. They would much rather write the song about, I'm out of that spot now, because that will be celebrated.
Yeah.
You know, that's safe. No one has to...
Because every Christian band that I've heard that's tried to approach it that way, like POD is the one that comes to most mind.
Yeah.
And they try to write a song that's from the perspective of a sinner, like a sinner, someone who's not a Christian.
Right.
You know, they get, quote, it's now called canceled, but like then it's just like outrage.
Yeah.
At that time. And so like it's like the Christians we've had a whole episode on American Christian culture for one, but like I think it needs a change, number one, but like,
definitely,
how do we change it? Because like you mentioned before, with the coming to church with a tattoo, or with having been divorced 30 years ago or whatever, and the church was saying hard no's to coming in.
Right.
And then now it seems like the pendulum has swung a little bit too far the other way.
Right.
Not that we should be not allowing people into church. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But like,
well,
in
it's
terms
more about
of
what they're teaching.
Exactly. The ideology of Christianity is not being taught. It's just swinging the other way in terms of loose interpretation of things.
Right.
And so, for America's sake, I don't know if it's that we need... Well, the claim I've always made forever is that there are a lot less Christians in America than what the statistics say there are, in terms of actually being an actual Christian.
Right. That's a very loose thing that a lot of people might claim, but what does that mean?
And we saw the same thing happen in the early, or the late 2000s, I should say, the late 2000s, where a lot of countries, a lot of countries in Europe became mostly atheistic in culture.
Right.
And it was because, like, for the longest time, like the Catholic Church is housed over there.
Mm-hmm.
And we can have arguments about Catholicism or whatever, but the culture over there is primarily atheist.
Right.
In America, the term atheist is like saying Satanist or whatever, but like they're not. It's not even close to the same thing, and that needs to change. But it's just because I think suddenly everyone realized none of us really understand this Christian thing that we all been growing up with.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we can be angry at our predecessors or previous generations for not actually teaching us these things. But
right.
What I've heard a lot of older people who really say fond things about, the millennials and Zoomers, is that they're extremely passionate about what they get into.
Right.
And they want an intellectual understanding of their faith.
Right.
And so I've said this before, that I think there's a huge wave of intellectual Christianity coming. It's not here yet.
Yeah.
But I can see that coming in the future.
I think it's on the verge, and a lot of that has to do with the internet. We feel a little bit more of a conviction to really know what we're talking about, because it's your fault if you don't. Like,
because like early Christians
there.
Yeah, early Christians, like, you would maybe get a few verses in your lifetime.
Right.
And, they would still go and die in the Colosseum eaten by lions.
Right. Yeah.
And we have the entire Bible in our pocket.
Right.
And someone makes a smart remark on Twitter, and then now you're an atheist.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Which begs the question of, like, again, this is one of those uncomfortable questions. You talk about there's entire decades and centuries of people who didn't really even have access to the Bible. And so how much of our, what's the word? Like our salvation is based on that alone.
Mm-hmm.
How much of it is almost might even you could say is based on like just internal knowings of what's right and wrong and not ignoring those things and then like desensitizing yourself to those things.
Yeah.
Like how much of it is a bit of internal seeking and prayer. Like for instance, I was on a podcast with my buddy Duke not that long ago, and I think we talked about this before we went on, but he asked me like, what church are you going to right now? And I told him like, at the moment I'm in between churches. I hop around, but I'm honestly not really in a church, like quote, there's a building and there's a name for it.
Yeah.
I do have a support system, and I do have people around me that I know that are Christians that are in a similar boat than me that I speak with all the time. And I was telling him like, this is not me encouraging others to do this. This is just something that happened to me and worked for me. But I remember, so I went to a church for, I think roughly 23 years. I'm 28, so I was there for almost my whole life. Maybe it was 22 years, because I believe I left at like 22. Because I went from being what we would call fed and being I was learning and growing in the church to a place of total stagnation, which I hated because I was like, that's odd. I've only ever felt growth at this church but I was also a kid growing up, and you change every year and a half to a totally different person. So I get into like the college age group, and I'm like, I don't really relate to anybody in this room. I'm the only guy that is like on a cultural level where I am, so I wasn't really making like close friends or whatever. All my close friends weren't really a part of that. And then not like being Christian, but like that group.
Yeah.
And so I thought, and also I wasn't really being utilized because like I was thinking like, God's given me these gifts to do music and everything. And so I want to like do things with the music. And I just wanted to contribute and be a part of that as I grew. Instead of just being the learner, I thought that God wanted me to try to flip that and help teach others. So I was like, well, I guess I'm at this point now where I'm not growing anymore. Time to help others grow. That was my logic anyway. So I left the church, went to another church for about 2 years where I was like the lead, like I led worship there for the youth. And I just kind of felt a very similar way where it was like I had this burning passion to help these kids and to try to learn myself. And I thought that God was telling me, hey, if you help others learn, you will learn through that. And I felt like I was the only one there doing that. And things just started falling apart with that ministry, and I felt like the only one that was just dying to make it work. So I left that church, and I did not know where to go for a while. And it was like, man, this is like year 3 of like no growth. If anything, I'm just stagnating more and more.
Mm-hmm. And
that's around the time when you're going to start maybe really questioning things, I think. And I remember just praying and talking to God and being like, what am I doing wrong? And it wasn't an audible thing. It was just like an idea that popped into my head where I felt like God was saying, like, this whole time you've been complaining to me and your friends that you're stagnating and you're not learning anything from these church leaders. And you've never once come straight to me to learn.
Wow.
You're always going to some other human being that has an incredibly limited knowledge of me. Their ideas are all set about who I am. And you never come straight to me. And that is partially reading your Bible, but a lot of that's prayer. And, we pretty much only pray when things are tough, when things are bad, and we don't really just converse with God on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I felt I needed to do. It was like, stop going to other human beings. You have resources at your hand. Him being like going straight to the source being one of them. So do that. So I basically stayed out of church completely, not on purpose, but it was more like, to me, the church is not just the building. Like, that's just where we have church. The church is a family. The church is a group of people. And I've actually had friends in the past who had certain pastors or certain family members that they were really close with, that they grew a lot with, that moved churches, and they felt bad about wanting to leave that church. And they were like, no, that's not what it's about. It's not about them. It's about Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, but if you don't have any friends, you don't have any family, you don't have any support systems, these people are just strangers to you that you stand next to during worship. That's the point of the church.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying that that's that church's fault. Like, oh, all those people in that church are wrong for that. Like, I think each human being only has so many hours in the day to pour themselves into another human.
Yeah.
And so maybe I know I've got like, I'm one of those lucky people that I have like 5 or 6 best friends. Like, and I mean that like for like just crazy awesome support system people that I would lay my life down for.
Yeah.
A lot of people, maybe you got one of those and they're just the closest that you can get, you know? So I'm really lucky to have a great support system and people that love me that way. But that's what a church is for. I wasn't getting that at those churches. So I said, I'm going to dip out of this and stop relying on strangers who I just trust that you have a better knowledge and a better means of leading me in the right direction than I do or that God does.
Yeah.
Because I don't know their personal lives. I just know, oh, you're a pastor. Cool. Well, try that with 10 different pastors and see how many of those go wrong.
Yeah.
Because they're just humans. Not discouraging people from going to church, not discouraging you from finding a home church and having mentors, but just any mentor doesn't do. It's not just go to any old church, go to have any old pastor. You have to have support systems. And I didn't have that. Got out of there, and I swear to you, in the 2 years that I stepped back from church, it was the first years of my life I was not involved in a church. And I grew more in that time than I think I did in the entirety of being in church. Mm-hmm. Now, again, for like 20 plus years, I was taking those baby steps, learning as a toddler, as a child, as a teenager. Yeah. But as an adult, because I decided, all right, I need to be in my Bible and I need to be praying, I was able to think thoughts that were not, they definitely weren't going to be brought up in church. I was thinking about things that at first I felt bad about because I was like, there's got to be a reason we don't talk about this. I discovered the reason is we get really uncomfortable talking about those things.
Yeah.
I can't remember where I was going with all that in the first place, but that's basically where I've ended up.
Yeah. Well, one thing. So there's a lot to unpack here. One thing that I've learned, because like I think a lot of the questions that you were just discussing there, most of us have, at least our age, have run into. I don't think this is an uncommon thing.
No, I think everyone runs into it at some point.
Yeah, but I'm saying like what I'm saying is like the situation that you found yourself in.
Right.
I think that's very common, and so I think it does need to be one addressed. Mm-hmm. Not saying that your specific situation is like any less or whatever. It's
right.
It's real.
Right.
And so one thing I heard from someone that they said is that when the woman poured the bottle of perfume onto Jesus' feet,
right?
Are we willing to be that? So we could be either used as someone who's going to be big on the stage that's getting to reap the harvest essentially, or are we going to be the person who does all of this work, like for instance for me with doing online content or whatever.
Right.
Am I going to spend all of these hours and all this time to not really see any of the reward,
right? But
what I'm doing is just pouring the perfume onto God's feet essentially, just for the show that how much love is actually within him and how much people are in love with him. It's like a living testament to like how good God is to people, that if there's all of these people who aren't super large or whatever that are putting their 100% best efforts and not their best efforts into getting his name out there, is probably the best way to say it, or to evangelize, even if there's not results being seen, is even more of a testament that it is real, that versus that if everyone who does it gets really big and then really popular, like celebrity status. Right.
Well, that was the whole significance of that story even, is just the sacrifice involved. She wasn't just pouring any old perfume on there. It was insanely expensive.
Like today that would be like someone giving like their entire savings, like their emergency fund, say like $10,000, $20,000, just like Here you go.
Right, and they don't get on Facebook and they advertise to their 100,000 followers, hey, check out all this money I'm donating to Jesus.
Exactly. It's just like...
It's literally, she did it in front of just a few people, and even those few people were like, are you stupid? That isn't, do you know what you could have did? I think one of the disciples was like, you could have donated that to the poor.
Why did you waste this?
Why would you waste that, donate it to the poor? And Jesus was like, bro, like, really?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that story is very important to see, like,
well, because I think a lot of the times that, like, us younger Christians, like, the situation that we're facing a lot of times is, like, we've been told growing up so much that God's going to use you. You're going to be so, like, you're going to be, like, seen by everyone. You're going to show God's love to everyone.
Right.
You know what I mean? And if you're told that 100 times while your brain is halfway formed, you're thinking, like, I'm a pretty special kind of person.
And you don't even realize it. You don't. It's not something that you just like one day you wake up and you're this narcissist. You know
it's not like maliciously like forming. It's like
right,
not coincidental. It's a consequential like coming to this understanding that I'm kind of a special person.
It's kind of in your subconscious too. Like, we get kind of self-centered in that way, and I think that. That's I talk about this a lot. There's a lot of Christian language that we use. I think that's definitely one of them when we tell people God's going to use you. It's sort of like, when do you call someone brother outside of the deacon out in front of the church? It's just this weird cultural, nothing wrong with that, but
nothing
you
wrong
don't
with
do that anywhere else. You only do it. That it just kind of shows we even have our own language right next to our own books, our music and bumper stickers. But I think that the whole thing of like God's going to use you in some ways. One, it is narcissistic to plant that. Well, if you plant that in someone's head, that can turn into narcissism. I think, because in a lot of ways, the Bible will tell you the exact opposite. Like it says, we're the hands and feet of God, meaning they don't move unless you move. So it's not necessarily that. Why don't you just sit back, kick back, have a lemonade, and God will use you? It's you can be used by God, or you can use you for God. Like. Go do it. You're the hands and the feet. And sometimes we get really, I think the church can, again, it's not out of bad intention.
I think
it's not out of bad intention.
I think that we've been told so many times, like God's going to send a check to your like a random check in your mailbox.
Right.
Like you've heard that story 100 times in the church.
You'll get your 3 wishes if you just rub the lamp.
Yeah.
Like, and God, Jesus isn't, that's not how God works.
No, like it's a very like, this is not about me story. This is about God.
Right.
Like that's like the whole thing that Jesus preaches.
Yeah.
And we've been told growing up so much that like, you're going to do amazing things or whatever. At least I've been told this, not necessarily in a malicious way from members in churches or whatever, but I'm pretty sure that other people have also been told that same thing a whole bunch.
Right.
And so like, I think the faster we realize that this is not about me at all.
Right.
And if I still pursue everything that I'm doing as if I'm doing it for God.
Yeah.
I'm still going to live, I don't want to say a happy life, but a meaningful life.
Right. How much harder do you think that it is now for us to traverse that idea in 2022 when selflessness and advocacy on other people's behalf has become that's the popular thing. That's the way you get famous. Like the Mr. Beast handing out money to people, do it in front of a camera. Like I think it was recently I watched a video of, I believe it was Jim Carrey, who actually was talking about like, imagine if you're a homeless person and someone comes up to you and shoves money and food in your face with a camera.
Yeah.
Like how that feels. And we kind of do that now. So like, I feel like everyone needs to kind of beg the question of how much that you do is so that you can be seen doing it, and how much are you doing just in the privacy of your own life because you know that it's right.
Yeah.
I know the Bible speaks on that too. It says like, keep your good deeds to yourself. Like,
yeah,
if you truly believe that there's a God that sees that and you're doing it to please him, why bring everyone else along for the ride?
Yeah. You're not praying boastfully to the masses. You're praying quietly.
Right. And I say that as somebody who I'm a nobody, by the way. So,
same. We could say anything we literally wanted on this microphone and receive no consequences.
Right.
For it.
Just so I don't know about that, but I will say that that like in the grand scheme of things, I hope everyone knows like that I know, like I'm not, whatever. I don't even know how to describe it, but for instance, like I'm a guy that is basically basing his career on how many people see me. And at some point, I think it sucks to be a musician. You gotta have to be a little bit narcissistic, a little bit. You have to have a little bit of confidence over the top to put yourself out there that way.
Probably the best way to put it is if you're planning on being successful in a capitalist music market, you need to be a little bit narcissistic when it comes to some of those things,
right?
In terms of like how you approach,
right? I mean,
the market.
Even the most humble seeming people, have to do that. There's a bunch of people in our genre, in our market, where their entire, maybe they don't formulate it that way to be their brand,
of course,
but their brand is loving, caring, most humble, down-to-earth guy. There's a bunch of them, and they're great, and we love them for it. But at some point, just on a personal level, I think that, because you can't, as like a spectator to all of these people, whether they be really famous or really just more small, like, yeah, I can see that that's like, it seems to be who you are. But on like a super personal level, I think for you to be more comfortable in your own skin and to know that that's even true, that what we just talked about has to be practiced. Where part of my career is going to be I have to just announce to the masses that I've released new music, that I've made this new piece of art. And a lot of times that art might be made from a perspective of, I hope somebody gets something out of this song. But if that was the only thing I did that was good, literally the only thing I did was like, I just thought to myself, I make all this music that helps these people. And I had someone tell me that they were going to kill themselves and they didn't because of music, which happens to a lot of musicians all the time, which is wonderful. But if that's the only thing you ever did and you donated to charity and then you made a big Instagram square for it and you posted it on Instagram and you get to the, like, are you going to be satisfied with yourself? Like, are you actually going to feel like you believe that stuff when everything you did benefits you like far more than it would be had you just been like, there's this thing I really feel like I need to do maybe for this individual. I actually feel like that stuff's more impactful anyway. Yeah. It's cool to donate to charities and stuff, and it's cool to do things that are like a mass. Look at all these people I did this thing for or help, but I think that most of the most important interactions we have are like one-on-one. And
that's kind of what's lacking nowadays, isn't it? That one-on-one.
I think that's why podcasts are so popular now, because this is something that I myself, and I think a lot of other people, but I'm holding myself accountable. I have to remind myself of this. You ever have a thought and you're like, not that you think it's so profound, you just think, geez, so many people need to hear this thought because this is something we're lacking in culture, or this is an idea I don't hear anybody talking about. And your first thing is like, thought is like, let me go to Twitter. I hear Elon just bought it, so like I can say whatever I want to on there now. But but yeah, like you want to say something on Twitter, or you want to post it on your Facebook or Instagram or whatever, or like just imagine like how much you ever got into an argument with your wife because like there was missing context in text messages.
Yeah, like
she just didn't know what you meant. That happens if you have a massive following on any platform. That happens 100-fold. And you don't have any kind of impact on anybody, even if what you said, let's say it was this incredible thought or this incredible thing. Like those ideas only get fleshed out and understood doing this.
Yeah.
And I think that's why podcasts are so popular. And I think it's also why, like, for instance, like maybe like someone like Joe Rogan right now will get ragged on because there's a whole group of people that know his name if they don't watch his podcasts.
Yeah.
But they got an opinion on what he said. They don't know what he said, but they got an opinion on it.
Exactly.
But I think these are really important to start a mental dialogue for people. Like, that's one thing I would like people to get out of this kind of stuff is like, if you haven't been asking yourself those questions, like, why do I believe what I believe? And am I chasing that knowledge to back it up? Am I living my life out as though I believe this, or do I just say that? Mm-hmm. Like behind closed doors, am I actually doing that or not? Those are questions I think people need to be asking. And you might not have even thought about it that way until you heard a conversation that you didn't even get to be a third person. You didn't even get to be a fly on the wall for. Yeah. But this makes that possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's like super important. I know that's why I consume podcasts like crazy. because it just makes me think.
So last thing then, this will be more, I guess, a personal thing. So this approaching of life, this ambiguity that we're facing, these questions that a lot of us, especially our age, are all asking. How can Christian art or artists help navigate that? And also and I just thought of this as well, like a lot of artists nowadays, like you said, can have to be a little bit narcissistic in terms like how social media is structured. Number one, it's all about, hey, can I keep your attention long enough?
Right. And I don't mean that as an insult to anyone that does it. This is like, I
no,
acknowledge that I have to be that. I have to do that too.
No, I know what you mean.
Can't be that alone.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't mean to say that negatively. How can Christian artists help influence and move Christians forward to a better understanding, like through their art and through the means of which we get art out there?
Right. First, I would say, my opinion, the way we can do that is stop being so attached to your labels, your Christian art. Start being more authentic. Make art that you know is dangerous, that you really mean. Like, take the things in your head that wow, I feel this way. You don't have to like that you feel that way. But no, there are others that feel that same way, and they need to hear someone else working that out right alongside them. Doesn't mean you're encouraging those ideas. It just means that, hey, this is where I am. There's a couple songs on our record that aren't out yet where I wrote them definitely not from the perspective of coming out of that valley. I wrote them right in the middle of it, and it is a representation of how I felt in that exact moment. I wasn't writing about something I just dealt with. I was dealing with it right then. And I think we need more people to be less afraid to make that kind of art. Be authentic, be real. I think if you're finding yourself, especially as a Christian, because again, like I said, like our band we're not a Christian band, and we're not trying to market ourselves to Christians, because I don't think anybody, especially Christian artists, unless you're like a worship project, like Hillsong, I get it. Like, you're not trying to, like, that is specifically for the Christian culture because the purpose of the music is to worship.
Yeah.
But if you're making not just worship, not that worship isn't an art form, but if you're just making art from the perspective of just pouring your heart out, no matter what the topic, be authentic. If you catch yourself going, I'd love to say that, but I don't think that.
Or like catch yourself being like, ooh, if I make this, I know I'll get a rise out of these kinds of people. Yeah,
just be honest. Like, you've got to get past that. I think that is a major part in moving forward in our culture. And I think that we did that on some levels. Like you talked about at the beginning, how music is different than like visual art, or like art that you can touch or that you can see or any of that.
It's one of the oldest art forms, too.
Right. But it's also, in my opinion, I think more people can get aroused out of themselves, out of music, out of sound, than they can visuals. Like, I've seen paintings, and you watch like the movies, and then there's the art critic, and they're like, how does this piece make you feel? And you're like, what a load of crap. But at the same time, it's like, no, like, pieces of art can make you feel things by looking at them.
Yeah.
But how much more potent is music? Music can make you burst into tears, and you're like, 2.5 minutes ago, I was fine, and now I'm here, and I'm questioning, you know what I mean? Like, or I'm in a better place, or I'm in a worse place, or whatever. Like, I think music is incredibly strong in that way, stronger than anything else.
So how can Christian artists, I guess we can say music artists, help Christians navigate, since it is so influential?
Be brave and be honest. Like I said, After Dusk is not a Christian band. Most of our content won't even probably have anything to do specifically with our beliefs, but the ones that do are very important to us. Or, whoever writes, like me and Chris write like 50-50. So there are some songs I'm singing are from his perspective and some from mine. But we literally, me and him don't even discuss lyrics that much, because there's very few times where we come to the table and we're like, ugh, I don't like that. It's like little tiny things. Because most of the time we read it and we're just like, I'm stoked on this because I can tell that's exactly, I know where you're coming from, even if I'm not coming from that same place. It's like, I feel like I understand you better now, and that you perfectly translated your feelings and your thoughts into this song. So we don't spend much time reevaluating the lyrics, especially since like we're not necessarily like the exact same place.
Yeah.
I love it when he brings me a song and I'm like, I'm not in that spot. Let's do it, because I can't write that song, like, or I couldn't have wrote that song without you. There's a lot of songs where it's like 50-50 and I'm like, God, I love the idea of starting some art, and then when you get to the end, you're like, this end product that we got now could not have been done by myself. It would be a totally different song. It may have still been a good song. I don't think it would be near as good, but it's just something about going into a creative process with someone else and creating something totally different because you both had a hand in it.
Yeah.
That I love. And we try to be super honest with our lyrics. So from like the Christian standpoint, like quit looking at the labels, quit looking at like what's acceptable. Nail that 99 thesis to the door if you got one. If you have these thoughts, maybe you should do, like, for instance, like, because I've had these thoughts for years, like just having issues with the culture and things I think we do repeatedly that are damaging or that are like not as good as they could be. And knowing that the reason we don't pursue them further is because of cultural norms and people being afraid to adapt. Stop that. Like, put yourself out there. If you have an issue or if you have a thought that you know is not going to be accepted by the masses because it's a little dangerous, do your research. Make sure that you're justified in what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and make sure that you're not just like reading into your own, what you'd like to see the world as, but if you think that you have something where it's like, no, I really think there's an issue here, nail your thesis to the door and do it with your art.
Have the bravery to bring it forward and the humility to be wrong.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. Yes, yeah. Have the humility to be wrong if you end up that way, but there's nothing wrong with expressing. I think that's one issue. We talked about how we deify like famous people, like artists. That's one issue with Christian music.
Pastors even.
Yeah, pastors. Like pastors and Christian artists, they become these famous idols, which is like very contradictory to what we even believe, but it's like part of marketing, and it's part of
it's almost inevitable too when
right.
so many people know you and then they come out to see just you specifically, like, oh, because I love what you do, I want to see you do it.
Right.
If you have 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people coming to do that, it's kind of hard for that individual not to feel a little deified. Right.
And I think that like we sometimes we think it's impossible to have a brand or to be in that kind of a like to be in the music industry. We feel like, well, I have no choice. I have to make it squeaky clean. I have to get rid of all the imperfections and stuff. But there are people in our culture right now that are literally famous because they don't do that. Joe Rogan is a massive example of that. Very flawed man. But he's the first to say, I'm a very flawed man. And he doesn't even build a brand off of that. It's just apparent the more that you watch his stuff and watch him grow and just be honest and say stuff, you're like, oh shoot, he's going to get in trouble for that. And he does it like it's nothing, because he's like, maybe he's
disarmed the argument. He's disarmed the arguments that people try to build up against him just because of how open.
Yeah, he's not set on any of it. He's like, I'm just here to learn about everything. Like, just because I have a guest on doesn't mean I have a flipping idea about what they do or what their opinions are. I'm just interested in things. And I think that there are artists that can, it's like you can do that a little more. I think there are some artists that are doing a better job of being transparent, and that is why people like them so much. I think Silent Planet's a big example of that. But yeah, I think that's something that's missing, and we need to kind of move away from that, because the church gets a bad rap a lot of the times because we're supposed to be an example of Christ, but that's not quite right, is it? Like, we can't be a perfect example of Christ. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be a people that strive to be as close to that as possible, but we do fail in every single aspect of that. There's not a single sin, there's not a single wrongdoing or issue where you can't find that someone in the church, prominent in the church, has made that mistake or done that evil thing.
Yeah.
Because we're humans, and it drives a lot of people away from the church because we don't start the conversation like that from the get-go, where it's like, we're flawed. We're really flawed. Like,
Yeah.
the goal is to try to move away from that and to try to I think
Well, what you're saying, yes, but also I think it needs to come into play that, like,
not it as an excuse, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Like, people will come to church with that expectation that, oh, these people are pretty much perfect because you're seeing them, act
Right.
like Christ a lot of the time. And then they get hurt by someone.
Right.
Because someone is human. And they think, this church stuff is not for me.
Right.
It's like there's two sides of this sword that I think need to
Yeah. Well, I think there's an
be
issue
talked about.
of tribalism going around too, because we strip each other of our individuality, where it's the
That's
church.
a whole other conversation,
Yeah,
too.
the church did this. It's like, no, an individual did that. That was a part of the church,
Yeah.
not the church. You could even have a church transgress against you all at once, and it still wasn't the church, because the church is this big generalization.
corporate church.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
this big generalization of like every person who's a Christian. So it's like, we've got to do a better job of separating that, where it's like, I'm an individual. That doesn't mean I'm going to think like, no two Christians will agree on everything. That is 100% fact. No two will agree on absolutely everything.
But they should all agree on.
There are certain things that they should
Yeah.
all agree on, because otherwise you basically took your leave from the faith. And some people like to still claim it after. Basically, it's like, again, we mentioned earlier, like, you don't believe Jesus died and rose again. Like, you've kind of departed from the faith. You can't keep carrying it with you. And then,
So one thing I like to do as the last part of the show a lot of the times is ask the original question again. In how would you say that Christians can face the ambiguity in life?
want to acknowledge that it's definitely there's going to be ambiguity. It's not black and white. None of it. Like, you're going to come across issues that you never thought you would experience, that your mom and your dad don't understand because they never come across that question or that issue, or maybe they just refuse to face that. All of us are born, because we're all born at different points in time and different cultural issues and different geographical areas. You're going to live a totally different human experience than another person.
Mm-hmm.
And so your perspective and your ideas are going to be different. Everything's going to be ambiguous. So you've got to figure out what parts of your faith and what parts of who you are rock solid. You got to have a foundation. If the house falls apart, you can rebuild it. But if there's no foundation, you're screwed. So you've got to figure out what parts of those are that concrete foundation of who you are, what you believe, why you believe it, why you can substantiate it, and then you move forth. I've torn the house down several times, but that's why I feel very lucky to have had the parents that I had and the upbringing that I had, and just, you could call it pure luck, a roll of the dice of where I was born. I feel like all of that set me up to have a great foundation. But I've tore the house down so many times, it's unreal now.
So if someone's looking to start digging through the ambiguity, I would say that someone would start in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's where you start. Like, if you want to start, like, getting through this life with some understanding and some meaning, you go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
You start off with, who is Jesus and why should I care? That's where I think, because, like, I grew up being told why I should care, but not everyone did. If you're starting from scratch.
Not anymore, at least.
Right, not anymore. If you're an adult starting from scratch, I think that's a great place to start. Because, like I said earlier, even if I was wrong, when I am asked that question, like, what if you're wrong? I was like, well, if I'm wrong, I die. I'm in the dirt. That's it. But at the very least, I will have lived a life attempting to emulate someone that I think had it figured out. Like, he knew how to live, man. I would never regret living my life trying to emulate Jesus, ever. Mm-hmm. Do I think I'm wrong? No, but no one ever does. If you hold an opinion, of course you think you're right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
that's where humility comes. Such a beautiful thing.
Having humility in things that you think are concrete too is really difficult, especially for Christians. It's like, no one's going to hear you out if you're not going to acknowledge that some part of you could be incorrect on anything. You know what I mean? So,
well, I'm so glad, because, like, this conversation alone touches on hundreds of different ones.
It really does.
And so, like, that's why this whole show is a thing. To traverse the gray, the gray of life, the ambiguity. And so I do really thank you for coming on, talking with you. I'm excited to see the new music coming out. You said someone's coming out in, say, July?
June 3rd, we have a new music video coming out. I think another EP drops like a month after that. And then, again, you won't have to wait very long after that to get more music. So it's just coming at you super fast.
Well, if you guys are interested in finding some of their music, I enjoy it. I listen to it myself, especially when I go out to mow. That's the last time I listen to it. Every time I go out to mow, I turn on your EP.
That's a good sign.
It gets me through mowing.
That's a good sign, because I hate mowing, and if you can make me forget that I'm currently mowing, you got some good music.
My neighbors can't tell if I'm having a seizure or if I'm using my weed eater as an air guitar.
Well, I would love to see you on the mower, like the mower's moving, but you're air guitaring the weed eater. Like you're just not even touching the steering wheel.
Oh no, we push mow here, sir. We push mow. Thank you for tuning into this week's podcast. I want to really thank you guys for tuning into this episode and taking a listen. If you guys enjoy the podcast episode, be sure to leave us a rating over on Apple or Spotify. It really helps out the podcast grow a ton. If you guys are interested in finding out more about After Dusk and at Boykin, be sure to search them up on Apple Music or Spotify or YouTube. Anywhere you can find music, you'll be able to find After Dusk. That's AFTERDUSK. Again, I want to thank you all for listening to this podcast. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.